Deirdre, Hemanta, welcome. So glad that you're here. Deirdre Toner, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell me what you do.
Yeah, sure. As you said, my name is Deirdre Toner. I'm with AWS, and I lead our go-to-market for all the data products. So think analytics databases, and as we know now, a lot of the AI components as well.
All the hot sauce these days.
Been hot sauce for a while. It's spicy hot now.
That's right. No kidding. Hemanta, you work, of course, with Rackspace.
Yeah, I work with Rackspace, came into Rackspace through acquisition of my company, Just Analytics, and I lead the data practice for Rackspace globally. So the stuff that Deirdre produces, I make sure our customers can use it and get value out of it.
That's fantastic. So, Deirdre, with your career, some time at SAP, it looked like about 5, 6, 7 years ago, you shifted to working with data products, kind of predominantly, it looked like. But as you think about the market, and I've been thinking a lot about this a lot lately, and that is that a lot of technology over the years has been a technology that, as somebody who's involved in go-to-market, you have to go out and convince somebody, first of all, that they have the problem, you have the solution for, and then you present the solution. But that's a little different these days with what's happening in and around AI.
Yeah, it's very different. And in fact, I've actually been in data a very long time. I was at Sybase, business objects, just different, you name it. If it's some sort of data, I've touched it. And I followed some of the same customers through my whole career. And there are some customers who are very forward. I'm a skier, so like they're forward on their skis about technology. And I mentioned some customers like Intuit that I've made a career of looking at what are the trends by watching those customers, but they're the early adopters and they lead the way. And you see, months or years later, the masses will follow. That's different than what we're seeing now. What we're seeing now is it's like all at once, there's this massive tailwind to basically get on board with Gen AI. And not everyone's ready for it. Not everyone understands it. So it creates opportunity for all of us to help them. We have the saying like, fall in love with the problem, not the solution. The answer to every problem isn't Gen AI or AI. Some of it's just data science or analytics or machine learning. But I think everyone does have really viable use cases for AI and Gen AI that we should help them with. So it's really about helping them understand how to put a little bit of rigor around that, especially when it comes to governance and things like that. At the same time, accelerate what they can actually showcase and stand out for the organization and the executives that are demanding, what are we doing with Gen AI? And I do firmly believe all the predictions that those who don't get their arms around it and leverage it to their good are going to get left behind.
They really will be the blockbuster. We're speaking with another AWSer earlier today, and we went around that example of if you're not, it's easy for folks, especially those that led, to fall behind if they don't keep up, especially in this space.
And to catch up the things are changing. I mean, I've seen like the App Server wars and the Java wars and all of that, right? Been around the block.
Very opinionated.
You had windows of like 4 or 5 years for you to catch up in the previous like database wars and app server wars and so on. Now you literally have like 4 or 5 months. So if you're not, and I'm saying as a customer, I'm not, as technology companies, obviously it's changed. But even as a customer, if your competitor, leverages AI to fundamentally change their business process, even if they're not able to get full value out of it today, they are so far ahead of you that for you to catch up, every time you're taking one step, they'll be taking 3 steps. So the gap is just going to keep getting bigger.
But that brings a real challenge, and the challenge being that blocking and tackling still has to happen. There still has to be infrastructure at scale. There still has to be clean data. I mean, Adam, I thought, said it really well today. I mean, data is the differentiator. I love that phrase. If only I knew somebody who came up with that phrase.
Our team worked hard because, we've been helping customers modernize their data platforms for a while. And this is, like I said, I called it a tailwind. There was like be data-driven mandate, which was a little bit of a tailwind. This is like a tornado behind us saying, like, use Gen AI. So it really accelerates the need to get the data where it needs to be, make it accessible and secure and interoperable and as seamlessly as possible so that you can leverage not only all the data inside your organization, but also external data as well, right? Customers need to be able to access a lot of different data for a lot of reasons. But when you look at making the use cases really valuable to an organization, you have to use something like RAG or fine tuning. So you have to provide access to it. And we announced some really exciting technology capabilities today inside of Bedrock, especially to help make that possible with knowledge bases and things.
Yeah. And what was exciting, I thought, about those announcements is AWS, especially this show, I mean, it's a builder show. Here's all the widgets, here's all the things, but really some polished stuff with what we saw in Q, whether it was for the call center. I love Q being part of the call, and not only providing answers to the attendant for how they might serve that customer, but also then evaluating how the call center operator functioned as well.
We've been excited about QuickSet Q for quite some time. I think I've been in, as I said, I was at Business Objects. I've been in BI for a long time, and this is groundbreaking what we can do, embedding knowledge where you work at a pennies on the dollar, what these customers are used to paying for, and make it really interactive, serverless, like all those things. And then the natural language component, which is where the industry is going, which led to, okay, now there's this layer of natural language, and we have all this rich history inside of Amazon of using natural language and AI. And so Q now is this overriding assistant. You mentioned like all the builder stuff you're used to seeing here, but today the persona that we're appealing to now are the people that are adopting and using and seeing value from the data.
Yeah.
So different personas being addressed, whether it's, call center agent or like executives or knowledge workers, productivity. I'm super excited about that.
Yeah.
But I mean, the persona of the knowledge worker is really changing as well, right?
Because everyone's a knowledge worker.
Because you talk about business objects, really, if you think about when we used to use business objects, there was this people sitting in the back office producing reports. Somebody on the front office asking a question would take 3, 4, 5 months sometimes
until
to get the report. Exactly. And now you have knowledge workers who have the skills, want to do it themselves, and then the tools like QuickSight and Redshift and Glue and so on, SageMaker and so on, just make it so easy for them to do things themselves.
Yeah,
and to do it in the moment when it matters.
When it matters, exactly.
Yes.
So the builder, don't think of builders as like engineers sitting and producing, and it is like people in the business leveraging the data to answer business question in the moment so that they can rapidly make business decisions.
Right.
So,
you guys even addressed how Adam did today about the fact that everybody should have access to the data, but the data that they need are allowed to have access to. And you guys have accounted for that as well.
That's the governance and the guardian that we're talking about. Yeah. And tomorrow's knowledge worker is, a kid who can write a prompt.
Question.
Right?
Exactly.
No, a prompt.
Yeah.
The prompt to someone else's.
The person who asks the right question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when the data is all available, that's nirvana, right?
Yeah. At what point? I always wonder, at what point do the AIs just start to talk to one another and we sit back and watch the show?
They're talking about that might have already been done. Who knows?
I heard about one group that had a couple of models and they had a third model. They were debating, and the third model was the arbiter of it all. It's interesting. An interesting story. But that's also, I think, part of how IT is changing so much right now, because the relationship between IT and the business is 100% different than it was, back when I started my career. IT used to be able to sit in the back office, in the back, and building in the back of the facility, and every 3 years they could upgrade some servers and then go on to just keeping things alive. But now things, first of all, in the infrastructure side, are changing too fast, wonderfully fast. Too fast makes it sound like it's a bad thing. And the employees coming into the workforce these days are so much more tech literate than what knowledge workers used to be. Which makes a huge difference.
And business cannot function. We saw it with COVID, right? The reason we were able to turn around and continue to grow the fact that the economy did not tank. 5 years back, if the same situation would have happened, the entire economy would have tanked, right?
Yeah.
It's only because technology is so integrated in how we do business that we were actually able to, once the distraction of commute went away, we were able to grow faster than what we could do previously, right? So that's the difference. That's where technology being a business partner kind of comes in, because now you are an integral part of how a line of business leader can scale their business. Without that, they cannot.
Yeah, so true. So Deirdre, you mentioned that a lot of companies for a while have had a mandate to be data-driven. But I think it's an interesting phrase, data-driven, because I think the definition of it is changing in what the expectations are. Maybe go take us back 5 or 6 or 7 years of what What did data-driven mean there, and what does it mean today?
Yeah, I think it always starts with an outcome, right? So what's the outcome you want? And the outcome isn't like more data or more access. Like we know the data is there. The outcomes are things like, improve my supply chain, improve my customer experience, improve customer cross-sell, upsell, optimize pricing based on demand, like as you see in the travel industry, and
Forecast churn,
all of those things. So being data driven is to help you to react more quickly to market signals and to fine tune your business for better profitability, better top line, better bottom line, you name it.
Yeah.
So there have been some companies who are more forward on that than others, and even then it was like if you don't, you will be left behind. But it's kind of a small step, whereas what we see now with being left behind in Gen AI is a much steeper slope. It's almost like a straight vertical up. So that's what we've seen, and why companies want to be data driven. We have all kinds of studies about. I think there was it's like 86% more likely to have more than 30% year-over-year growth. I'm sorry, it's 20% year-over-year growth. So there's all kinds of metrics that we have about how effective the organizations are when they are data driven that help fuel that. And so of course any CFO or board or CEO is going to want their team to do that.
Sure.
But getting your arms around it from a technology perspective, we think about the digital transformation, data transformation. Well, data fueled the digital transformation.
Yeah.
But it's people, as we talked about earlier, it's people, process, mindset, and technology. So there are a lot of barriers to getting there, which is why, studies show today on average, about 25% of the organizations are actually getting as much value from the data as they think they should, and the rest are still kind of on that journey.
Yeah.
But I mean, you bring up a good point when you bring mindset, right? Because people, process, technology, we all know that. The mindset. Do you think that the fact that that you have more tech literate iPhone generation that is coming into the workforce or working,
right?
exactly, does that make the process, do you think the reason things are moving faster now is because that generation is much more used to, why not, why can't we do it this way as opposed to something else?
I think people got really frustrated with the old kind of reporting and queue that you waited for, and the lack of interactivity of those when they realized what they could get on their iPad or their iPhone. Like, why can't I get this at work? So that started it. But then I think it became more about like productivity and competitiveness and top line and bottom line. But the mindset also includes things now like you have to rethink, like we had the governance and the guardrails that you talked about that you need to be safe and secure. We're all centralized. And that was a really good way to keep things safe.
Right.
Well, you can't do that now if you're going to distribute and become agile and innovative, right? You have to also break out that governance and the organization that supports it and federate it across the organization. So it's a different organizational construct. And then the biggest thing we see is companies need to really think about data as a product.
Yeah.
So take everything you've learned over here in product management, which doesn't exist inside of IT, right? And now you have to think of data as a product. And if you do that, what we see organizationally is it's not really just IT anymore, IT in the business. There's a lot of the data things reside in a different group. Like the chief data officer is often a peer of the CIO. Or it's a part of that organization, or it's like data and analytics, but it's application oriented. Like, what's the outcome part of it? So we see different organizational constructs supporting that.
And a lot of it, data as a product is interesting because if you think of that's also an organizational shift that we are seeing. That it started out with CDOs and CAOs kind of owning the entire data supply chain, and the more progressive organizations we see now, you have the producers of the data are owning the data product.
And they must be in the business.
And they're part of the business. They're literally part of the business. And then you have the CDOs, CAOs, they're more in the business of defining the rules and the structures and the operating model and the technology stacks and so on. The education, how do you make your team more literate? So they're more in that business as opposed to dealing with the nitty-gritties of how do I write a data engineering pipeline. A lot of that is now becoming peer-to-peer across the producers and the consumers, which is like a perfect place to be because I know my data best because I'm producing it. I want to use it. Therefore, I know what I need. So it makes it really, really useful.
Yeah. These organizational constructs that mirror those architectural patterns, I think, are what we're seeing the most advanced customers are doing.
Right.
And everyone wants to get there.
Everyone wants to get there.
They need help to get there.
Well, and that brings up an interesting question as well. So as you out and represent what AWS brings to market from a tooling point of view, I think that in the past, a lot of organizations, especially larger enterprises, they could afford to build their own teams. They could afford to have a group that looked forward, and they had a group to keep the lights on. But that's changed so much with the pace of this innovation. So what is the patterns that you've seen as partners have been engaged? Are companies looking for a one size fits all? Are they looking for specialty partners or to come in and solve specific problems? But what's the role of partners in enterprise today?
Well, first and foremost, it's huge, and we're really grateful for our partnership with Backspace. It's so important. And my whole life, I believe that partners are the kind of the key to success at scale. And obviously, we have a pro-serve team, but the demand is so overwhelming right now. But to your point about what are they looking for, it really it depends on where the customer is. An organization is on that journey. I talked about it becoming data driven, and then on top of that, you're going to layer on, okay, I need to spin up a Gen AI use case right now. So it depends on where they are in that journey, but augmenting what they have, there's a huge skill gap exists today in data and data science. And I will do my bit here. We cannot solve the skill gap if we're only tapping into half the population. We need to get more female representation in this industry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We are super passionate about women in technology. We do we live broadcast every Tuesday morning, but the first Tuesday of every month is Women in Tech Tuesday. So we shine a light there. But
can I add something to that?
Please.
Something I think that's super exciting about Gen AI. So Gen AI will help solve some of that skill gap because it'll automate some of the rogue data pipeline processes, right? But it also creates new needs and new skills, right? So there's an opportunity now to appeal to people who might have been intimidated by data science or Python, so maybe the real deep STEM stuff wasn't for them, but we also need now creativity, storytelling,
curious people,
communication. Yes. Exactly. So this is a different set of skills that we can now associate with data and technology careers. And I think we need to promote that very early on. And Adam mentioned programs that we do to get people cloud skills. Well, there's also specific programs. There's one that we run worldwide in most countries in the world that takes 12 and 13-year-old girls, and they create competitions on how to build things and in a community that's safe, and kind of remove some of the stigmas about what does it mean to be a technologist and help introduce them in a fun way. And I'm super proud of that program.
That's really exciting. And I think there's also, we see this because it's the industry that we're in, that technology used to sometimes be a component of a solution or an opportunity. Now it's absolutely ingrained in everything. Even if you're just somebody who's writing a word processing document. I mean, you're using Gen AI to help with that. You're working in a spreadsheet, you're using it.
Yeah, and you bring up a very good point that it is so embedded that it's no longer about just writing code.
That's right.
There are different things associated with making a solution live. Like prompt engineering, it's more about understanding the psyche of the person who's going to ask the question, as opposed to
a very different skill set. Very different, right?
Exactly. And actually, if I'm a data scientist or a data engineer, I might actually not be very good in structuring the prompts because I don't understand how people use it. Yeah. So it makes it,
So what you're describing is empathy.
Yeah, exactly.
And empathy is something that a lot of young females will understand, right?
Correct.
Different skills.
Yeah. Correct. So when I do those women in tech conversations, I always ask a question, and I never tell them I'm going to ask the question because I get a lot of feedback from moms and dads who will watch the show. And they'll say, this was fantastic. I'm going to take it home and show this to my 12, 13-year-old daughter so that they can see what's possible. So what I'd like to ask you to do is to answer the question. If you were to speak to 12-year-old Deirdre or to somebody's 12 or 13-year-old daughter, what would you say?
Yeah, I thought about this before. I was not shy. I've always been a bit bold, but not all my peers are bold. And some of them were, smarter in tech than I was, but weren't able to speak up and find a voice. So what I will tell everyone, and it applies for me too, even though I was bold, is be bolder. Go bigger. Really, the sky is the limit. And quick little story. There's just a lot of women I know are held back in our careers because we have this thing called imposter syndrome, and we don't want to speak up unless we think we have the perfect answer because we might be called out for being a fraud or you don't belong. So it's anybody who doesn't look like the others in the peer group. And my whole career has been I don't look like the others, right? But I was bold enough to speak out. Not everyone is. But if you don't get the diversity that you want from your workforce, if you don't get the contribution from everybody, that we know all the benefits of doing that. So if you can be bold and speak up, you'll learn that not everybody has all the answers.
Yeah.
My funny story was, and I told this story once before, I was at Sybase and I was in an office in Dallas, and I moved there and I took golf lessons because it was the thing that everyone did in the office, right?
Yeah.
It's what you do to get outside in Dallas. And everyone in the office, all the men, talked about their golf game all the time. And I'm used to being good at the athletic thing I'm doing, and I wasn't that great. So I was super intimidated. I was the imposter. Didn't want to go because they talked about it. I'm like, they must be really good. So I finally, one of them was so nice about it, convinced me to go out with him. And he tees off at the first tee, and he completely shanked it. And then I was like almost embarrassed for him because that's how I would have felt.
Right.
Because my expectation was, it has to be perfect.
Yeah.
Right.
And it went on again and again and again. And so by about the sixth hole, I realized this is his game,
Yeah.
and he's okay with it.
Right.
And that's the difference between people who suffer from imposter syndrome. Not is like you're okay with it.
Yeah.
Right.
You know you're not perfect, but you're okay with it. And so I took that lesson. I'm like, okay, we had a great time. I wasn't embarrassed anymore. I could relax. I enjoyed, great connections. And then I translated that to work. I'm like, these are the same coworkers who are talking about what they do at work. And and I know I'm good
You're
at that
shaking
playing
that
field.
meeting in there.
I
aren't
know
you?
I'm good on that playing field and I can deliver. So that was my mindset
Yeah.
shift. And
Yeah.
it's like training our minds to say, yes, you're good at this, and just use your voice and try it. Not everyone's perfect, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah, I have a similar story. It goes back. I was super quiet, super shy growing up, not bold like you. And it was like 10th or 11th grade. It was before school started. We're all hanging around. My best friend was a guy named Rob. And I don't know, I'm sitting there being quiet because I was afraid they would laugh at me, or people would worry, or what would they think? And I don't know what Rob said, but everybody laughed at Rob, and I thought to myself, that's why you keep your mouth shut. Aren't I smart? By lunch, nobody remembered anything, and I thought, you know what? Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody steps in it every now and again. Just be there, be present,
And get
enjoy what
okay
you
with
can,
it.
and be okay with it. Because it really is that. Okay, now we're having a psychological conversation, but it really is that difference between are you okay with you and your imperfect knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's a place where you
And tying it back to Gen AI, things are moving so fast that don't feel shy that you don't know everything that is happening. Nobody does.
Yeah.
Nobody does. And it's perfectly okay for two engineers to sit there and say, you know what? Both of us have half the knowledge.
Yeah.
And we're going to try something. And maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. But that's okay.
But you got to try.
Yeah.
You got to try. And even if you're not the first company to get out, just get out there.
Exactly.
And get out there.
We call that learn and be curious. It's
Yeah.
one of the leadership principles here at
Yeah.
Amazon. Yeah.
It's a good one. Well, folks, thank you so much for being a part of the conversation today. This was super interesting. I'd love to talk more, but we all have places to be and there's more to learn.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Deirdre.